Now we come to our second film, which is, of course, the new Universal monster movie, The Wolfman. Not to be confused with the 1941 Universal monster movie, The Wolfman. Now, this is helmed by Leigh Whannell, the creator of Saw, co-creator of the Conjuring franchise, and of course, gave us the brilliant, I think, reinvention of the Invisible Man some years ago. Now, Jake went to the cinema for us and gave this a whirl, and I can't tell you how much I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say about it, Jake. Does it live up to the brilliance of the Invisible Man?
I think it's interesting. This film approaches the mythic cinematic story of the Universal monsters in a very similar way. Obviously, the Invisible Man redirects the story to be about domestic violence and does it expertly. I also agree. I think it's such a wonderful reinvention from a bloated carcass that was the idea of the dark universe, a misplaced, mismanaged idea that crashed and burned from the very first movie, the Tom Cruise Mummy. However, their reinvention to create these much smaller, cheaper, far more contained movies, I believe, as a filmmaker who delves into horror more readily than others, I think it's a really good approach. And I think The Invisible Man did it really well because it had a lot to say. It had some great performances. And this film sort of begins in a different way. My main issue with this film is I thought it was good. I thought it was very enjoyable, watchable. I wasn't terrified at all, but I've subjected myself to some terrible and very scary horror movies. So I think my poor brain had been desensitized. But I didn't find it scary, but I thought it was quite nicely atmospheric, especially in the opening of the film. It has a beautiful landscape shots of the Oregon forests where it's based, and it does that very, very well. So it takes the rather bloated mythos of the Wolfman. With this film, I thought it had some very good things going for it. I thought they're making it a very personal story. They make it about a very small family. My producer even said about the film that it's about generational trauma. I also think it has some aspects similar to The Invisible Man of about domestic, not in the same level of domestic abuse, but sort of domestic disturbance, the inherited anger and of different generations and how people deal with that. It treats the idea of wolf men and the changing as very internally related to masculinity. Only the men turn into wolf men, as the movie dictates in its title. But also it's treated as sort of a sickness and illness. And therefore, I think that's a very strong thing about the film, is that the actual transformation of one of the central characters, it's in the trailer, the father of the family, he gets infected. It's a really interesting scope of loss and people coming to terms with degenerative illness as well. It has a lot of really nice moments there, especially between him and his daughter. I think Christopher Abbott, who plays Blake, the lead character, has a really, really well-established relationship with his daughter very early on in the film. I found that was really nice. I actually think that young actress, she was really good in the film, sort of captured some of those nice moments, especially with him, really nicely. And then the film actually takes sort of stance about how you have to step up as a mother as well. So it's a very interesting take on that. However, the film is also probably a bit too long, even though it's not the longest film in the world. I think it's too long for how much it actually really has to say. I came out of it thinking, wow, that would have been an amazing short film if it had been, 40 minutes long and they'd done a very similar thing, because it's like a trapped in a cabin story. It takes place over one night. It's a very small scale. Yeah, this somewhat supernatural thing occurs of people turning quite grotesquely into beasts, but it's treated in such a way that it is very small and contained. And so I really think that it was a bit too long.
It's interesting because the Wolfman transformation process is so legendary from the 1941 film. There are lots of kind of rumors and stories about how long it took for Lon Chaney to get into the makeup and get out of it and all of that kind of thing. And, there are also sort of apocryphal stories about people being, really terrified by that sequence in the film. Do you feel that the redesign of the Wolfman works in this film? Because I think there is a danger in the 21st century of it coming off a bit goofy.
Now, it's funny you say that. There is some murmurings that people don't really like the redesign that they actually go with. Leigh Whannell also said, I read up that he made a comment that he was certain some people won't like it, but he thinks it works for this film. I will agree with him. I think that the redesign of the Wolfman goes to a point where it has canine-like attributes, but you see very clearly the transition from human to man. And this isn't a werewolf, it's a Wolfman. So you still want to draw the line between the two. It's obviously not a patch on the amazing transformation in An American Werewolf in London, which is the gold standard, but the actual transition, the sort of the crossing the line between the two is kind of subtle. The makeup job is really effective, I think, because it's a slow transition, and then there's a more intense one a bit later in the film when the humanity is all but lost. I think some people may look at it and be like, well, that's a man being a dog. It's kind of goofy, but it's a film about someone, the wolf man. It's about a man turning into a wolf. So I think if people are up in arms about it, I think that might be a bit, you're watching the wrong film, to be honest. But I think it is interesting to say that, you know, how do you tell these stories again? Because we've had a Dracula story in the last couple of weeks, a reimagining that some people thought was incredibly effective. We thought the complete opposite, that it was absolutely missed opportunity, and a complete redesign of Dracula as well, obviously as Count Orlok, but now we've had a redesign of the Wolfman. I think The Invisible Man was most effective because it really modernized the story.
Yeah.
And this doesn't really do that. It just creates a very nice atmosphere. I thought a lot of the choices of cinematography were really good too, but there was a lot missing as well. Like, it wasn't as hefty as I think it could have been if they really just went with the family angle. It sort of really sort of falls off by the third act. Yeah, that it's hard to talk about much more because it is a really nice attempt. I think it's a really good approach to take these Universal monster movies in this way. But I think they need to figure out what really worked in The Invisible Man more than just trying these things without as much depth as it really brought in that film. I'd love to see where they would take something like Frankenstein, or maybe, I guess we had The Shape of Water, which was a really interesting retelling of a Creature of the Black Lagoon type story. But it'd be really interesting to see how to modernize it a bit more, because this film was sort of stuck in the sort of 80s and 90s, really, because they sort of go back to a family home that was stuck in that period of time. So it didn't really modernize the Wolfman story in the way, but I guess modern attitudes of how it was approached. So I would recommend it. I'd say it's a decent watch, but I don't think you'll be quaking in your boots or howling at the moon per se for this film. But yeah, it's a decent watch, but it's not a patch on The Invisible Man. But I'd love to see if they keep doing this type of thing. Hopefully it's successful so they can, and where they go next with these monster movies.